right, let's endure the attack and tremble. What I've entitled this lecture, in which I'll probably get to a few of the proofs, his attack on the proofs for the existence of God, I've called it Dawkins' attack on the five straw men. Okay, why did I call it that? Because, as you know, there's a classical fallacy called the straw man argument, all right? And what it involves is when you can't beat your opponent's argument, when you can't really challenge it, okay, you change it. And you make it into sort of a mockery or an exaggeration, in this case, a mockery of what it actually is. And then you destroy not your opponent's argument, but the argument that you've created for him. Okay? So just like it's harder to, duel against a real person, okay, it's much easier to duel against a scarecrow, right? And they chop, and then chop the head off the scarecrow, no problem, okay? But you've put up the scarecrow, and the scarecrow is not the real argument, okay? So this is what he's doing, and it'll be pretty obvious when I go through it. Okay, I want to start, just to prove that I'm not exaggerating here. I just want to start by reading St. Thomas Aquinas. This is, of course, the prima pars, the first part of the Summa Theologiae, and it's question 2, Article 3. And he's dealing with the question whether God exists. Okay? And he hits that profundity note immediately. Because as you know, in St. Thomas's articles, you have the objections to his position first. Then you have an authority cited in favor of his position, but then in the body of the argument, he argues it out rationally, logically, his position. Of course, to the question whether God exists, in the sed contra section, St. Thomas cites, because we ask ourselves, well, what is this God we're talking about? So St. Thomas cites the book of Exodus, particularly Moses' encounter with the burning bush and God through the burning bush. And it says, so St. Thomas quotes, "It is said in the person of God, I am who am." So he starts off. That's the God we're talking about. First proof. The first and most think about it, but just even listen to it. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now, whatever is in motion is put in motion by another, for nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. That's how it starts. Okay. Let's see. Okay. We'll keep that in mind. Okay, this is how Dawkins in chapter 3, which is entitled Arguments for God's Existence. This is how he starts out. Okay. The 5 proofs for the existence of God by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century don't prove anything and are easily exposed as vacuous. The first 3 are just ways of saying the same thing, and they can be considered together. All involve an infinite regress. The answer to a... Okay, you got to write this down. I capitalized it all and... All involve an infinite regress. This is how he explains that, translates that, infinite regress. The answer to a question raises a prior question, and so on ad infinitum. This is how he... All involve an infinite regress. All the first 3 proofs. The answer to a question raises a prior question, and so on ad infinitum. Now, this is my little gloss on that. What do these proofs have to do with asking questions? Does he not even understand what causality is? We are not speaking about raising questions. We are speaking of causation. One thing causing either motion or change or contingent being. Is he so superficial that he cannot even grasp the cause and the effect relationship? Okay? Argument 1 from motion. This is, remember that whole nice, beautiful argument 1? That was just the first part of argument 1 that I gave you, by the way. Okay, this is his entire presentation in chapter 3 of argument 1. Okay? This is what he says. From motion. Argument 1, from motion. The unmoved mover. Nothing moves without a prior mover. This leads to a regress, from which the only escape is God. Something had to make the first move, and that's something we call God. And that's the whole thing. Okay? That's the most superficial rendering of the proof for motion I have ever read myself. First of all, what does he mean? Let me read his statement about the first proof again. Unmoved mover. Nothing moves without a prior mover. This is what he's presenting to the people who read his book as the first proof. Nothing moves without a prior mover. This leads us to a regress, from which the only escape is God. Something had to make the first move, and that something we call God. Okay, so let's back off from what he says, and let's not let him lock us in the lockbox Okay? And let's look at St. Thomas's first proof and think about what we can get. Okay, first, what do we get from St. Thomas's proof? First thing, St. Thomas is basing all of these proofs on an absolutely certain given, which we have from our sense experience of nature. Okay, St. Thomas now, he just missed that completely. He doesn't, well, I guess he doesn't think it's important at all. Nothing to chalk up to St. Thomas's credit at all, okay? The fact that he's basing all his proofs on something, on 5 different facts that are epistemologically given to us in our common sense experience of the world. First, there is motion. Things are in motion in the world first, right? Okay. Anyone not believe that? Raise your hand. No? Second, there is change in the world. Anyone not believe that? Nope. Third, things come to be and pass away. Does this seem like fantasy land or what? Things come to be and pass away, right? No one objects. So he bases his proofs on types of knowledge that can't be denied, fundamental facts of knowledge that can't be denied. Okay. So that's one thing that Dawkins doesn't even give him credit for. He's not just talking about ideas. He's not just talking about mathematical possibilities. He's talking about irrefutable facts that every human being has to recognize, okay, if they're honest. Okay? That's one thing. In this scarecrow rendition of the first proof and all the 3 proofs, okay, Dawkins makes absolutely no reference to the absolutely certain philosophical principles that are laid down in the first of the 3 proofs. Okay? He makes absolutely no reference to the absolutely certain philosophical principles that are laid down in all of the 3 proofs. Okay? What are some of those certain philosophical principles? Okay, here we go. For the proof on motion, the fact is that the absolute certain fact is this, that nothing can bring itself into a state of actuality from a state of potentiality. Okay? Nothing can bring itself into a state of actuality from a state of potentiality. In the case of the first proof, that has to do with motion. All right? In this case, it's motion. So something cannot be brought into motion except by a thing cannot be brought into motion which is not in motion, except for by a thing which is actually in motion. Okay, something which is actually in motion has to convey that motion to something which is not in motion. His point here is that nothing can put itself into motion. Nothing can put itself into motion. Nothing can bring itself from a state of potentiality. In this regard, it's a state of motion, to a state of actuality. Okay? If that is the case, okay, so that's his argument. That's the fundamental principle. Nothing can bring itself, his overarching principle is nothing can bring itself from a state of actuality to a state of potentiality to a state of actuality. Okay? Because it doesn't have the act in itself. It has to be given that act. It has to be actualized. Material things have the potential for local motion. Okay? Material things have the potential for local motion, from movement from one place to another. However, that potentiality has to be actualized by something which is already in motion. All right? Which has the actuality of motion. So, the billiard table, all right? The 8-ball, right? Just sitting there, okay? You're just standing around the pool table and the 8 balls in the middle, and you're just looking at it and say, okay, whoa, the 8-ball, right? Whoa, look at that thing go. But you got to hit the ball first. You got to hit the ball first to make it go. Oh, okay. All right. Something in motion, me giving the motion to the next other ball, and it goes, hits the 8-ball. Okay? There has to be a transmission, an actualization. Okay. Look at what he says here. Remember what he says. Nothing moves without a prior mover. This leads to a regress, from which the only escape is God. Well, he acts like the idea of regress is something strange, okay? Like, why are we talking about this? Well, obviously, in the case of causality, you have prior causes, right? So there seems to be a regress going back and back of prior causes that caused the action, caused the motion, okay? So my arm hits the little white ball, right? And then it goes and hits the other balls. Okay, so that's the regress. And he says that this is the whole proof. That's what he makes the whole proof. This leads to a regress from which the only escape is God. Something had to make the first move. Well, St. Thomas is not arguing. The point is not a regress. The point is that you can't have an infinite regress of causes. Okay? You can't have an infinite regress of caused causes. Meaning, you can't have a whole system of caused causes if the principle is, so this is a principle that he doesn't even mention, okay? This is a principle. St. Thomas is not pointing to an infinite regress. He's saying an infinite regress is impossible. Write that down. It's just so irritating. It's so irritating. And you know what he says by infinite regress? You know, in his, what do we call it, the shell mentality? With his shell mentality of reality, you know what he's calling an infinite regress? Like, he talks about, he brings up some other professor in Australia or something place, and like cutting meat, and you can keep cutting meat in smaller and smaller slices until you get to, like, I don't know, you keep cutting it, I guess scientifically cutting it, and then finally you get to like an atom or something, you know. And he says, then you can't cut any further. And well, of course, he never heard of quark nuggets, I guess, you know, the subatomic particles. But he's speaking of that as an infinite regress, as an example. Cutting it into smaller pieces? What an example. St. Thomas, and then you got to stick God in there. No. St. Thomas says you can't have an infinite regress of caused causes. You can't have an infinite regress of caused causes with regard to motion, with regard to change, and with regard to contingency, contingent beings, okay? You can't have an infinite regress of things causing each other to be actualized, which are in themselves in a state of potentiality, okay? One thing actualizes the other with regard to motion or change or being. And you can't have an infinite regress of caused causes. You can't have an entire closed system of caused causes. Why? You can't have a closed system of caused causes. Infinite, all right.
So there's no start.
There's no start, right? Because the individuals within that system would ultimately be causing themselves, all right? With regard to motion, with regard to change, with regard to being. Ultimately, the system would create itself. And if everything in the system can't actualize motion or change or being, well, then the entirety of the system can't cause those things. So you can't have a closed system of caused causes. Okay? And you don't just have, well, then God's got to be the cause. Then you throw God in there. And who's to say it's a God like you portray it? This is him. Who's to say it's a God like you portray it? You know, doesn't have to be like that to get a first cause. Well, yes, it does. Okay. But we'll tell you. Yes, Father, go ahead.
It seems to me that that's his whole idea, is that everybody's God.
The system sort of actualizes itself.
Yeah, it's like by limits or this natural selection, each one has it in itself and has the power to lift to a higher level of complexity.
Yeah. St. Thomas Aquinas, who actually gets to the philosophical level, shows that can't happen. All right, just not logical. It's not logical. See, starts out with the certainty of what we know from sensation, and then he reasons concerning that, thinking about the causal connection. But in using concepts that you need to use, like act and potency and so on. Okay? Because you need to use those concepts if you're talking about causation. So, the only thing that can, if you can't have a system of, we'll just do the first proof, okay, for this moment. So the proof from motion, he's going to say you can't have an infinite series of moved movers. Okay? You can't have an infinite series of moved movers. This is St. Thomas, okay? Because then something would be moving itself. Then ultimately. Reducing itself from potency to act. So what kind of thing do you need? If this is impossible, and you see, an infinite series of moved movers is impossible, okay? But yet, motion exists. So how do you account for it? How do you account for motion then? If this is impossible, you have to posit what? Unmoved mover. Something that moves and yet is itself not moved. Okay? So you need an unmoved mover. Not that, I just made that up. That sounds good. Well, why not a pink elephant? Why not like a purple dragon? Why not? No. The thing we are looking for to start it all off in this regard has to be an unmoved mover. Something that has the power to move and yet is unmoved himself. Why does he have to be unmoved himself? He's otherwise just in the system of moved movers. So you're not explaining anything. You see, that's why you need an unmoved mover. That's why you need an unmoved mover. So that has to be one of the attributes. And St. Thomas is not just giving you everything about God in this one proof, but he's saying, he's not telling you everything about God. That comes after in the prima pars. He's just trying to nail down the necessity of the existence of God. Write that down too, because that's sometimes little star, and St. Thomas is trying to prove the necessity of God. Not that God exists, God must exist. The necessity of God. Necessity of God. I always say that the most this is just me, okay, that the most interesting question in philosophy is not, does God exist? Okay, but how can anything other than God exist? That to me is the interesting point. But, St. Thomas is sort of nailing down the fact that God must exist. And also, what's implied here, he must be outside the whole system of moved movers, right? Right? He's got to be outside that system of moved movers, or he couldn't be the necessary source of motion. Just like the second proof, okay, which focuses on change. Second proof focuses on change. Second proof focuses on change. Oh, gosh. I don't want to read you. I mean, so you know St. Thomas. Just a tiny bit. The second way is from the nature of efficient causality, okay? Or we can just say change in general. In the world of sense, we find that there is order in efficient causes. There is in no case known whether neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. For so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. Okay? Now, in efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes, following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, the intermediate is the cause of the ultimate cause, and on and on. Okay. And that's just the beginning of the proof. Okay. What is Dawkins? How does he portray that proof to the young college students that he's trying to reach here? Second proof, the uncaused cause. Nothing is caused by itself. Every effect has a prior cause. And again, we are pushed back into regress. This has to be terminated by a first cause, which we call God. That's it. That's it. So, with regard to change, we're in the same problem. Okay? We're talking about efficient causes. Which means things which bring about causes that bring about this transition from potentiality to actuality. And see, it's very general and broad. It can apply to almost everything in our world, okay? Bringing about this transition from potentiality to actuality, okay? You can't give yourself actuality in a certain regard if you only have potentiality in that regard, okay? You can't give yourself a knowledge of geometry, okay, if you don't have a knowledge of geometry. You have to give your potential to know geometry has to be actualized by someone who already has knowledge of geometry. Okay? So you have to be actualized by something already in act. Okay. So now, okay. Here Dawkins presents the proof in such a way that every important philosophical term is laden with subtle mockery, as if it is almost ridiculous to speak about realities as effect and cause and prior cause. He clearly does not grasp why it is that it is God in uncaused cause, possessing every quality that must entail, who must render all change possible. And since we are certain that change is happening around us, that specific type of cause must exist, or the impossibility remains. And yet we know that change is not impossible, but rather certainly real. So, St. Thomas is proving not everything about God, but he's trying to prove the idea of an uncaused cause. Okay? We have unmoved mover. Now we have an uncaused cause. We speak about change in general. And let's not be stuck in the lockbox, okay? Let's not be stuck in the lockbox. Let's free our minds so we can actually think, okay? And when I say efficient cause, and that by looking at all efficient causes and what the relationship is between potentiality and actuality, we talk about uncaused cause, God is the uncaused cause. What kind of causality can we speak of here? Well, it's going to be where God has to be pure act ultimately, right? Oh, yeah, okay, we'll put that down. If we're talking about nothing can bring itself from potentiality to actuality, okay, and that applies to a whole enclosed system, okay, then there has to be something that brings about actuality in the whole system. And that cause can't have potentiality itself. Because then you'd say what? Well, it can't give. Then it's in this system, right? Of potential beings screaming out for actuality. So the uncaused cause has to be pure act. Okay, the uncaused cause has to be pure act. Okay, I lost my train of thought. What did you say, brother? Oh. Yes, pure act. Okay, that just blew me away. Okay, I forgot what I was thinking. Okay, that is, okay. Efficient causes, series of uncaused causes. There has to be an uncaused cause. Okay. The only thing that if everything has to bring itself from, if something has to be brought from potentiality to actuality, you can't have a system in which everything is bringing itself, in which one thing is bringing itself, the other thing from potentiality to actuality, okay? So you can't have a whole system, closed system, of things in potentiality. You need something that stands outside that system and possesses pure act, that doesn't need to be brought into a state of actuality because it is actuality. Oh, now I know what I was going to say. Okay. Causes, efficient causes. When we tend to think of efficient causes, give me an example of a efficient causality change.
A man makes a chair.
Okay, a man makes a chair. Okay, brother, you want to give him a name?
Brother Anselm.
Brother Anselm.
2 years later.
Okay. Brother Anselm. Okay. And here's the chair. vent there, brother. It's okay. Megan put it in another room other than mine, but okay. Brother Anselm makes the chair. Is that an example of efficient causality? Yeah, right? Okay. And it'd be, I mean, in itself, that's great. I mean, you're still talking about actualizing because, Brother Anselm in a certain way has to be actualized, and actuality has to be conveyed all down through the system of prior causes. But is there any other kind of efficient causality that, other than brother working on the chair, is there any other type of efficient causality that's present here?
Somebody to teach him how to make.
Yeah, someone might teach him how to make it, so we're going back. And this can't go into infinite regress either, okay? But Brother Anselm can't make the chair. Okay, you can't have brother makes the chair unless Brother Anselm, what? Not that he has a hammer, brother. That's just instrumental cause. Dive deeper, yes. No.
He needs wood.
What's happened to you, brother, all these years? Come on.
Final cause. Brother Anson needs to be.
Final cause? What?
He needs to be.
He needs to be. He needs to exist, okay? Brother Anselm needs to exist. Brother, there has to be this ising in brother. So Brother Anselm is a carpenter. Before Brother Anselm can be a carpenter, brother is a carpenter. Before the Brother Anselm can be a carpenter, okay, he has to is, okay? So he has to possess the property of ising, and so he has to exist, okay? And, I mean, as far as I know, Brother Anselm hasn't existed forever, right? So he had the potential to exist. Well, what about causality that way? Who brought Brother Anselm and the whole world that he depends upon into existence, into being? This is an aspect of the proofs that Dawkins completely ignores or doesn't understand or intentionally forgets. Okay? He's attacking the idea that there's a God who's a creator. Okay? And yet he never grapples with the idea of creation. Creation is not just fashioning what's already given. Creation is bringing something from nothing. And not only bringing something from nothing, but maintaining, sustaining that thing in existence. Okay? What about that? In philosophy, we call that concurrent causality. Concurrent causality. While Brother Anselm makes a chair or rides a bike or does anything, okay, that's causality, true. But there's an underlying causality of upholding Brother Anselm in existence and the chair and everything else. You see, that's a level of causality that he doesn't even want you to talk about. You should talk about it because you're talking about creation and who could bring it about. And if it was brought about, and yet the whole question of existence, being, ignored. So not only do we need an uncaused cause and pure act and being itself. You see what I mean by don't let him put you in a lockbox? Because Locke's not going to let you use those terms. But they're real terms that point to real things, real realities. Pure act, being, concurrent causality, all those things. Use them. Don't let them narrow your world and argue on their terrain. Okay? Who can give something existence? What is Darwin? Darwin, yeah. Well, he does everything else, right? Waves the magic wand of natural selection. Shoop, that's all you need to know. Father, you need some consciousness raising, okay? It's who can bring something into existence which doesn't have existence? Oh, that which has existence, but not just has existence, is existence. You see how we can, if we just think metaphysically, go back to establishing something's necessary about God? And we're basing it on what we experience. Things exist. They're not just table and brown and flat and soft, and they exist. What about that? You even say yourself, Dawkins, or maybe it was Hawking, I can't remember, that a critical question is, why is there something rather than nothing? It's a famous Heidegger. Well, why is there? It's a legitimate question. Okay, later this afternoon we'll move on to the third, fourth, and fifth proofs. Okay?